Numbness or detachment? A short background. I feel no attachment to anything. Am I numb? I don't feel desires anymore. It just is. My ego tries to keep me engaged by stimulating me. I read books, but I feel there's no need, as I already know. Question. Is the purpose of these teachings and questions, etc., a way to assist the ego to surrender? Interesting one. The background speaks something else, and the question asks something else. But that's okay. We can bring some reconciliation to this. So that there is a title to this. There is an overall theme: numbness or detachment. In other words, right? There is a phase, there is a distinctive phase in absolutely all awakening processes, and that phase is indeed feels as if we are being numb. How long that phase lasts is a different story. But first of all, I'd like to draw your attention to that inevitable, unavoidable phase, process, when we do indeed feel that certain numbness, where that comes from. So in other words, before we even begin to go into the other aspects of your question, what ego has to do with it, and whether ego is trying to engage, or or whether this whole purpose of this teaching is to help ego to surrender. I'll just leave this for a moment. I want you to first to understand detachment versus numbness, or numbness and detachment. How do they sit together? This numbness, what is it? Where it comes from? Numbness. What is numbness? Obviously, we all know what numbness is. I sat on my leg, or maybe leg crossed one over the other. At a certain point, I get up, I feel numb. It's like, I can't even put the whole weight of my body on that leg. It doesn't support me. It's completely numb. The muscles and everything is numb. The nerves. I was lying down, my arm was in a certain way, and I feel numb. What happens there? Why does it happen? Well, it's obvious because due to certain position, there perhaps has been a restriction in circulation, and the supply of blood has been uneven to certain parts, and certain nerves have been deprived of that constant flow, which then results in not feeling acutely this or that part. There are also other more medically known conditions when simply some parts of the body, mainly extremities, their hands or feet, begin to feel numb, and we don't feel them. Again, that's all due to the working of the neurotransmitters. It's all to do with the way the information is being supplied to the cortexes, and in the respective cortexes, as we know, the seat of the entire physiology. The entire physiology we could feel, but if there is this numbness, it could be twofold. It could relate directly to the area itself, but it also could relate to the cortexes. I don't want to take you there. This just to give an example of what is happening in terms of the spiritual awakening, in terms of the release of the force and what you're going through. There is the process and phase known as unplugging. In the phase of unplugging, the old connections begins to die away. You probably have heard me speaking, and other teachers probably speaking about this. You have probably heard some of the neurophysiologists speaking about that. In What the Bleep Do We Know, in that kind of animated film, they show that very well through the language of the animated cinema how this gut and brain reaction works. How electrical responses in the brain issue qualitative hormones into the body, how these qualitative hormones obviously makes certain states to be experienced, certain psychological, emotional states, and when we re-experience them, we obviously, that happens at the connectivity in the brain cortexes when certain connections are being made. The connection is made, electrical response. Connection made, electrical response. Someone said to you something, you got to used to respond like that with the humor, there will be this connection. Someone said something to you, it rubs you in the wrong way, there is anger, and the connection is made, and you feel that response. And it's been re-enlivened to the degree when it is precise position of one electrode to another which touches that surface in the cortexes, which sends qualitative responses throughout the entire neurophysiology. This is essentially what known in Oriental spirituality, the wheel of samsara. This is the wheel of samsara. Or this is the wheel of samsara. Electrical responses in the brain and qualitatively issued juices. The endocrine system works in conjunction with the electrical responses in respective cortexes. But in the awakening, unplugging begins to take place. This unplugging is literally when temporarily this, what otherwise works automatically, fail to take place. I will leave for a moment why that happens. I just want you to simply understand the mechanics first. It's as if there is not enough momentum, not enough gravity, not enough propensity for that connection to take place, and that connection weakens. That's why I call it unplugging. It's otherwise socketed. Every female male or male into female, whatever you want to call it, is socketed all the time. When we say like this, we should understand that it's already plugged, but the electricity, the electrical charge taking place. In the unplugging, you take it out. Just as you put computer on shutdown mode rather than sleep mode. In that unplugging, tremendously important thing happens. System, your nervous system, has given a chance to rest. It's as simple as that. Because it does not work at all. And that feels as if being numb. It's not uncommon at all. For many spiritually awakened beings, not spiritually awakened, for many spiritual aspirants, when they undergo this process of awakening, when life force is released, when they undergo through these phases of unplugging. And that unplugging is accompanied by that numbness, what you call, that nothing really excites you anymore. Or what used to excite you no longer excites you. You used to be a musician, someone strikes a chord and already it produces a myriads of sounds, perhaps forming a melody, and you want to go home and give it a try. You hear sounds in nature and that really takes you. This is a positive example of being a creative being. You can give any other example if you prefer. If negative example works better for you, do that. Someone used the words for you before, and these words used to really destabilize you, make you feel inadequate, sad or angry. Suddenly it doesn't happen. Someone says to you, oh, you know what, you are such a misfit, and it used to really drive you crazy, but now just there vaguely somewhere, but okay, what's misfit actually? What does misfit means, Oh, you might have no response whatsoever. This is a necessary phase, so do not be afraid. And guess what? The detachment this detachment known in Oriental, various Oriental spiritual traditions, spoken of with so much reverence, in terms of with so much, because it's a very desirable state, that also known as dispassion, to cultivate dispassion. In Buddhist traditions there is to how to cultivate dispassion. But how can you cultivate dispassion? Means you're trying to weaken that what otherwise automatically works. How can that really happen unless spontaneous unplugging takes place? I am not sure. I'm still not sure how can actually one successfully practice any dispassion. One can remove oneself to the rocks, mountains, trees, deserts, and try to practice dispassion towards this or that passion in life. And we know for each such example there are mythological examples of how that fails, or how that potentially could fail. How even the one who, metaphorically and mythologically speaking, sat for 10,000 years in total meditation, and then a naked heavenly being passes by, out of the window all that dispassion. You see? But in these processes, when life force awakens, when there is a real visceral awakening, this is granted. So I want you to understand that what sometimes could be called numbness, it's that necessary phase. The phase when tremendous rest is given to the nervous system. When it's not excited, which you got used to be excited. You know how many people, it is proverbial, I'm not the first, not the last one, to point out that what we today consider life lived normally is actually life constantly lived on a level of stress. Life lived on a constant level of high excitation. And I'm not even speaking about someone's character. Someone is more, let's say, excitable, another one is slow on the go. No. I'm speaking about that what many people essentially consider to be a normal life is when you are constantly fried by your desires. Then if you are constantly being fried by your desires, means your life is happening, means you're fully being alive. It's by now should be an outlive perspective. An outlive perspective that unless I'm completely in a frenzy of my passions and desires, then otherwise I'm half dead. That's far from the truth. Far from the truth. So first, cheese to the numbness. Okay, so let's not consider numbness as something of being of an anomaly. It's not a pathology. It's a actually important phase when nervous system goes through a total rest. That total rest is because there is this unplugging. And because of this unplugging takes place, there is a possibility for new connections to be made. And it is these new, qualitatively new connections that is what we call, in this particular perspective, rewiring. That's what rewiring is. There was this particular wiring, unplugging took place, and rewiring is now when on the outside it's seemingly the same being, but this being is rewired. Yes, during this rewiring, some of these old connections will be revived. And the lost excitement and numbness will be replaced with a newly found zest for life. But it will be a qualitatively different zest. It's not because someone is frying you and you are jumping there on your back or on your tummy on this very hot oil and pushed to act. But it's a different affair altogether. It's a very different feeling of when one is being motivated, when one is being directed, when one is feeling this different, qualitatively new, different way of expressing oneself. So without unplugging, there cannot be rewiring. Because, and I don't know why, how to explain it to you, because I'm not a neurophysiologist, perhaps I'm saying, take it with a pinch of salt, from the perspective of how it works, there are only that many connections that can actually be maintained. So that those, as it were, let's call them cords that were unplugged, would be used for creating new connections. Because they would be created. They have to be created, new connections. But first you need to give yourself this time, not to judge yourself, not to compare yourself, not allow others to drive you in this. Because people will tell you, oh, you used to be so and so, you used to go out and dance all night and you don't want to do this anymore. You're getting old, you're getting this, you're getting that. No, get this out of your system. Rewiring comes on its own when you're ready and these new connections begin to be made. Qualitatively different. Hopefully much more life supporting in terms of the overall evolution. And who knows, sometimes due to these rewirings, a new being is being born who will be put in the service of evolution. Every person out there who is in a position of guiding others is a person who undergone through rewiring. That's all. Undergone through rewiring. More upgraded system. An old system wears itself out. It works at the level of stress all the time and burns itself. It constantly shuts down, and it's an upgrade to a qualitatively much more effective system. This is a reductionistic maybe reductionistic perspective, but let's look into that for the lack of kind of more sophisticated, because I don't want to go into the language of the esoteric tantra, because I don't want to lose some of the others who are with us today. So now, to your actual question, is the purpose of these teachings and questions a way to assist the ego to surrender? It's a tricky question, very tricky question. Because, why am I saying it's tricky? Because if for a moment we presuppose that this is about surrendering of the ego, we might put ourselves under impossible task. Because it's not in the nature of so-called ego to surrender. Ego does not surrender. You see? Different aspects of our being surrender. Ego is, by definition, if we speak of that ego, that what we understand for that structure of identification with this temporal, where this identity took place at the expense of more magnanimous feeling of what we are. If we hope that one day this will surrender, or somehow something, some external circumstances will make it to surrender, then we are in maybe for some kind of very, very long and exhausting battle. Instead, I invite you to look at it from a very different perspective. It's not the ego that surrenders. Ego is just the instrumentality of consciousness. So don't give it too much importance. Yes, we speak of it in a daily language, we speak of it as in various ways, that it's something that prevents us from being happy, something that prevents us from being more connected to the others. It prevents us from being more altruistic or experiencing greater degrees of empathy and so forth. Be more understanding, more compassionate. We could say in this kind of language, we could say that this is all due to the ego. But if you want to understand the real mechanics of what is happening, then do not try to find the guy who is responsible for this. Do not find the girl who is responsible for this. It's not because of the ego. Ego is just instrumentality. Understand it for what it is. Instrumentality, just like any other faculty of your being. There's these senses, magnificent senses. Think about the senses beyond just what we experience just for a moment. What an amazing instrumentality these senses are. They are at the disposal of the mind, and the mind in turn has this ability to enjoy the sensories, this sensory enjoyment. It's all in the mind anyway. And then this mind essentially has this sense of whom it is belongs, and that is where that sense of identity, that's where the ego structure comes. A more refined structure still is the intellect. Intellect then connects us to the supreme mind of the universe itself, given that kind of loosely spoken of structure, how we function in the embodied state. So ego has its place. It's not about slaughtering the ego or surrendering the ego. The very opposite of surrendering the ego or slaughtering or killing the ego is also the expansion of your own sense of individuality beyond its contracted walls, beyond the walls that limits your individuality to just body-mind conglomerate, just family, just tribe, nation. You can contemplate on that sometimes. So ego, you could see here, will become that very flexible. And I'm not talking about the Buddha-like experience or Christ-like experience. I'm actually talking about how flexible you will find that focal point of attention is. So in other words, what you will find that ego can move at least in these contemplative moments. Even if we are given to the immediate action in interaction with the others, that may immediately fail and you will see the limitations and you fall on your face. But don't be discouraged. I'm just giving this example to when you are able to contemplate on what you consider to be yourself. And when you release that diaphragm, you can see actually that what you consider yourself can move in and out. You go to nature, when you start climbing up, you start going up the mountains, at some point you forget yourself. You forget your identity, you forget yourself. And you're not even in meditation, you're just walking, seeing the clouds, chirping of birds, and you forget about where you are, who you are. If you don't have any immediate concerns, like bodily concerns that prevent you from experiencing this moment, you'll lose yourself in no time. You swim in the ocean in a warmer time of the year, you feel the same sensation. You don't swim with all your problems. The breathing takes over. And water, a lot of water. In these moments, where is your ego? In deep sleep, you dream, and then in deep sleep, all this identity with the body and the body itself ceases to exist. Where does the ego goes? You need to be able to contemplate on that, so that you can see that there is no such fixed thing as your ego. Relaxed about that, and you will see how that what you consider to be the predicament is no longer there. So it's not that you can assist the ego to surrender. You see, surrender is an outcome of progressive phases of awakening. It comes by itself as an act of grace. The greater the grace, the greater is the surrender.